Before we talk about environmental justice, environmental health, and the movements that have impacted that, let's first focus on a really basic question of why would this matter? Why would the environment matter? A lot of people, when they think about environmental justice, are thinking about like way into the future, climate change, and yes, that matters, especially because when it comes to climate change, those who are going to be impacted the most are people who can't afford to go fly away to other planets or build underground bunkers. There actually are rich people out there that are spending millions and billions of dollars on private islands, on underwater and underground bunkers that they can turn to when climate change happens. So um, let's think about, or not when it happens, because it's always happening, right? And it's happening very quickly. But in terms of, okay, so when we actually start to see the major effects that really hurt people and wipe out entire populations, it's going to be the rich that end up still coming out on top. And so it matters, right? The environment matters, particularly for people that don't have the resources to fight against the impacts of environmental change. But at its basest, the environment matters because it gives you the things you need, right? Your water comes from your environment. Your food comes from your environment. And you'll notice I have a little infographic down below, an image of a pyramid. Those of you who are familiar with psychological studies are probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Um, Abraham Maslow, I think he was what field was he? Oh, obviously psychology. He was a, wow, I can't think. I'm getting tired. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, a Jewish psychologist. I believe he had Russian heritage. But he was really obsessed with, okay, so what's the point of life, right? Why does life matter? And for him, self-actualization was the ultimate goal. But he created this pyramid that really exemplified the fact that you can't really reach that self-actualization, that like becoming your best self, living your best life, being hashtag blessed until you've met all the other needs that come before it. So for instance, you can't really achieve self-actualization without a community, right? Without people and a feeling of belonging and love and connection. But before any of that, you can't even really focus on that unless you've like eaten and gotten water and shelter. I like to compare it to kind of the easiest go-to example for me is, have you ever been in like really deep thought about something and you're being super intellectual and look at you go, and then all of a sudden you have to pee. You have to pee so bad. And it is all you can think about. All you can think about is this basic body need, right? All other things go out the window. Money goes out the window. Life goes out the window. Self actualization goes out the window. What matters in that moment is your basic body need. Now, that's kind of a silly example. But for me, it is the best way to understand the way that basic body needs really can make everything else kind of impossible when they're not met. If you don't get to go pee, you're going to sit there thinking about nothing but that. Same goes for, let's say, a child who is hungry and is being expected to really focus on their timetables and sit still, and they can't because they're hungry, right? So when these basic needs in our environment aren't met, then we really can't achieve much. And that is kind of the basis of a lot of environmental justice theory, is that, we really have to be focusing on the ways in which people's basic needs aren't being met, these basic rights we have to things like clean water and healthy food. When they're not being met, what more can we really expect from people, right? And so we have movements like the ecofeminist movement, also known as the environmental feminist movement, fairly recent movement, but I would argue that the reason it's considered fairly recent is because white feminists have taken an interest in it fairly recently. Environmental justice is something that indigenous people have been fighting for a long time, and that's something that we'll go into in this page and in a couple of pages. Because when we're talking about things like water, that's really important, and that's something that indigenous people have been at the forefront of for a very long time because it has impacted them so greatly. It also has roots, in Chicana feminism. There's a really awesome book that I wanted to get, and I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to at least read the introduction of. Um, but unfortunately, we didn't have it in the library. And at the moment, I didn't quite have the funds to get that book for you, but, or the time to like request it from Ohio Link. But if you're at all interested in Chicana feminism and the connections between like ecofeminism and borderlands and spirituality, there is an anthology called Ecological Borderlands Body, Nature, and Spirit in Chicana Feminism. Now, I really enjoyed this book back when I had access to it, and I think you will too. In case you're interested. This isn't a must read. I just included a link at the bottom of this page in case you're particularly interested in this field, so you kind of have a place to turn to. There's not a lot of writing on Chicana feminists' role in ecofeminism, and I think that that's really ridiculous, given that, one of the most well-respected feminist theorists is a Chicana feminist that based her theories on the connections between land and spirit and identity, known as Lauria and Saldua. She was a poet, she was a thinker, she was really influential in our understandings of what she calls the mestiza consciousness, which is, being both, of two or more different lands, of two or more different identities, and at the same time using that placement of being of multiple things to reject being solely anything. And to kind of resist some of those mainstream norms. Um, I have a link to her writing below, or at least one chapter from her book. Read it. She's a really beautiful writer, and she's a really understandable writer, so you won't have to worry about that. But go through this page, get a sense of what ecofeminism is. It's a BGSU alum that gives that TEDx talk. I think you'll like her. And gain a sense of the roles of Indigenous activism and Chicana activism, or at least Chicana theory, because that's really where Ansaldua lies more. And try and think about the connections between them. And then in the next page, you'll be going through water, food, and housing, the connections between those three, why they matter, and what some of the key issues in at least the United States are.